If you take nothing else from today's episode, please take this. The problem that you're experiencing is not a lack of time. It's not a lack of systems, and it's not that your team isn't capable. The real problem is that you're still carrying the weight of the practice. Even though that you've started to remove yourself from the work, you haven't removed yourself from the responsibility, and that's why it still feels heavier. That's why you can't fully switch off, and that's why it still feels like it all depends on you. Now, the solution clearly is not for you to care less, and it's not for you to lower your standards. It's for you to change how you lead. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast. The podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. Now, today I want to talk about something that doesn't get spoken about enough, because if you've been following along with the podcast, we've covered a lot recently. We've talked about stepping into the CEO role. We've talked about systems. We've talked about marketing, vision, leadership, and culture. And for many of you, the great news is that you're doing the work. You're thinking differently and you're trying to lead differently also. You're putting things in place. But there's something that you notice that is still lingering, even when things are improving, even when the practice is growing, even when the team is stepping up, okay? It can still feel like it all depends on you. Like if you took your foot off the gas, then things might start to slip. Like you're the one that's holding it all together. And here's the part that's often really confusing, because on the surface, you're doing everything right. You're building systems, you're training the team, you're becoming more strategic. But underneath it all, there's still a weight. There's a sense of responsibility that just doesn't switch off. And what I want to suggest to you today is this. The problem isn't that you're doing anything wrong. The problem is that you're still carrying it. You've started to remove the work, but you haven't removed the weight. And until that shifts, no amount of strategy, systems, or structure is going to give you the freedom that you're actually looking for. So, in today's episode, I want to explore that. We want to talk about why this happens. Why is it that so many chiropractors still feel like it all depends on them, even when they're doing the right things? And importantly, how to begin letting go of that weight without letting the practice fall apart. Because that's the real goal, folks, okay? Not just building a practice that works, but becoming the kind of leader who doesn't feel like they have to hold it all together. So, before we go deeper into this, I want to give you a simple framework to help you understand what's actually going on here. Because again, this isn't about doing more and it's not about fixing your systems. It's about understanding the difference between the two types of responsibility that you carry as a practice owner. Now, the first is what I would call operational responsibility. Now, this is everything that we've been talking about over the past few episodes. This is structure. This is systems, this is roles, this is decision making, okay? It's making sure that things are clear, repeatable, and not dependent on you. And when you get this right, the practice can run. But there's a second layer, okay? And this is the one that most chiropractors don't realize that they're even carrying, okay? It's the emotional responsibility. It's the feeling that if something goes wrong, it's on me. It's the need to check. It's the need to step in. It's the sense that you're still the safety net. Even when you've built the structure, you're still holding the weight. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to break this down into three really simple parts, okay? Now, first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you see where this emotional weight is showing up in your practice. Now, second, what I want to do is I want to explain why it's so damn hard to let go of, even when you know that you should. And third, I want to give you a practical way to begin shifting out of it, okay? So you can lead your practice without feeling like you have to carry it. Because that's the real goal here. Not just a practice that runs well, but a practice that feels really light to lead as well. So let's start with the first piece. Where does this actually show up? Because most of the time, this isn't obvious. It doesn't look like chaos, and it doesn't look like things falling apart. In fact, From the outside, your practice might look like it's doing really, really well, but internally it's going to feel different. And this often shows up in subtle ways. You might find yourself checking in on things, even when you don't need to. You're reviewing notes, you're double checking conversations, you're keeping a quiet eye on what's happening in each of the rooms. Now, it's not because you don't trust your team. In fact, most of the chiropractors I see doing this actually do trust their team. They just don't fully trust the gap between stepping back and things going well. And that's where this can get really confusing, because there is a version of checking in that is healthy and necessary. But here's a really important, in fact, here's an essential distinction, okay? This is different from healthy leadership oversight. Healthy oversight looks like this. It's reviewing dashboards. It's looking at key metrics. It's having structured check-ins. It's intentional. It's scheduled. It's focused on patterns. What we're talking about here is something else. This is reactive. It's in the moment. And importantly, it's driven by a feeling that you need to make sure that everything is okay. It's less about leading the system and more about staying close to the activity. So the question I want you to ask yourself is this: am I checking in to understand the system, or am I checking in to feel in control? Let me say that again. Am I checking in to understand the system, or am I checking in to feel in control? Because one builds a stronger practice and the other keeps you tied to it because you feel responsible. And it will show up as low-level tension where you feel like you can't fully switch off. Even when you're at home and even when the day is done, your mind is going to still be in the practice. You're going to be thinking about a patient interaction. You're going to be thinking about a team member. You're going to be thinking about what could go wrong tomorrow. And then there's this one, which is really common. What you do is you step in just a little earlier than you need to. So, for example, a situation arises, and instead of letting the system or the person handle it, what happens is you step in. Again, not because you have to, but often because it feels easier, it feels safer. And in that moment, what you're telling yourself is that this is actually leadership. But what's really happened is that you're reinforcing the idea that it still depends on you. And over time, gang, this creates a loop. The more you step in, the more it depends on you. The more it depends on you, the harder it is to step back. And this is where most of us as chiropractors get stuck. Because on paper, we've done the work, but in practice, we're still carrying it. So once you start to see this, the next question becomes, why is it so freaking hard to let go of? Because logically, it just doesn't make sense. You know you've got the systems, you know you've got the people, you know things don't need to depend on you the way that they used to, and yet it still feels difficult to step back. Now, there are a few reasons for this, and the first one is, for a long time, you were the safety net. You built the practice. You were the one that made the decisions. You were the one that solved the problems. You were the one that made sure that things didn't fall through the cracks. And that role became part of your identity. So when you do step back, it doesn't just feel like a behavioral shift. It feels like you're letting go of who you have been. Now, the second reason is that being needed feels good. There's a sense of control here, a sense of important, a sense of things working because you're involved. Now, when you step out of that, there's a moment where it feels uncomfortable, almost like you're not contributing in the same way, even though that you are. You're now doing it at a different level. Now, the third reason is the uncertainty that goes along with this. When you let go, things might not be done exactly how you would do them. Mistakes are going to happen. Things might take a little longer. And this creates discomfort, okay? But here's the key shift. That discomfort that we're talking about is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is changing, because for your practice to grow beyond you, there has to be a period where things feel a little less controlled. And this is the exact moment where most chiropractors reach and then they retreat. You step back in, something isn't done exactly the way you would do it. A patient interaction feels slightly off. A team member hesitates. Something takes longer than expected. And your nervous system goes, see, this isn't working. So you end up stepping back in. You fix it, you tighten things up, and you take control again. And instantly, you feel better, more certain, more controlled. But here's the problem. Every time you do that, you train the system to depend on you. You train your team to look to you, so nothing actually changes. Now, here's the important reframe. That period of things feeling a little less controlled is not breakdown. It's a transition. It's the space where the team is learning, where your systems are being tested, where ownership is actually being built. And if you remove that space too early, you remove the opportunity for growth. So instead of asking, how do I stop this from feeling messy? Okay, the better question is this: how do I stay in this long enough for it to actually stabilize? Now, practically, this looks like a few things. First, what we've got to do is we've got to set clear guardrails. What is it that matters most? What can't go wrong? Okay, be clear on those two things. Second, define what an acceptable mistake looks like, because mistakes will happen. The goal, folks, is never perfection. It's always progress. And third, what you want to do is you want to create a rhythm to review and refine, okay? So instead of stepping in immediately, you step back, you observe, and then you coach, because this is where real leadership happens. It's not in controlling the outcome, but it's been developing the people and the systems that create it. And yes, I promise you, it will feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort is the price of growth. Now, if you can stay in that space just a little longer than feels natural, this is when things will start to shift. That's when the practice is going to begin to move from depending on you to being led by you, okay? And if you can understand this, and if you can see that this and what you're feeling is normal, then you can start to move through it. So instead of reacting to it, because the goal isn't to remove responsibility, it's to change your relationship with it. So now, folks, the question becomes this: how do we actually shift? Because awareness is powerful, but if it doesn't change how you show up tomorrow in practice, then nothing really changes. And I want to keep this simple, but I don't want to keep it shallow, because this is where most chiropractors get stuck. They understand the idea, but they don't know what it actually looks like in practice. So let's make this real. This comes down to one shift from control to development, and there are 3 ways that this shows up. The first is this: you must delay your intervention. This is the first place to start. And often it's the hardest, because your instinct, as we talked about before, is going to be step in early. So let's just say that a CA is handling a phone call and you can hear it not quite going the way that you would do it, or the way that you trained them to do it. They're hesitating, they miss something, and it feels a bit clunky. And every part of you wants to step in. So what is it that most chiropractors do? They jump in and they take over and they fix it. And yes, in that moment, the outcome improves. But zoom out for a moment. What just happened? First of all, the CA didn't learn. The system didn't get tested, and you reinforce the idea that you're still required. So instead, what you need to do is delay the intervention. Let it play out. Then afterwards, then you step in. Hey, can we just go over that phone call for a minute? What do you think went well? What would you do differently next time? Now what you're doing is you're building capability, okay? You're developing the person, not just fixing the moment. So step number 2 is we need to shift from fixing to coaching. Now this is subtle, but it's powerful. Most chiropractors lead like this. A problem shows up, they provide the answer, here's what we do, and here's how to handle it. And again, this works, but what it does is it creates dependency, because your team is going to start coming to you every time they need an answer. Instead, what I want you to do is shift into coaching. So let's say that you have an associate that comes to you and says, I'm not sure how to handle this patient because they're not progressing in the way that I'd hoped. Now, the instinct might be for you to step in clinically, but instead I want you to pause and ask, what do you think is going on? What have you tried so far? What would be your next step? Now, here's the nuance, and it's really important, gang, because there's a fine line here. If these questions or these lines of questionings comes across as a test, or that you're trying to catch them out, it's going to feel condescending, and that's going to break safety. So this only works when you've created an environment where it's okay to get things wrong, where feedback is normal, where mistakes are part of the process, not something to be avoided. And the way that you ask really matters. Tone matters. Presence matters. For example, instead of saying, how do you think that went, which might feel like a test, you might say, hey, can we just reflect on that together for a moment? What felt good about that call? Where did you feel a little bit off? I've got a couple of thoughts as well. Want to walk through it. Now, this is collaborative. It feels safe. It feels like you're on the same side. And when your staff feel safe, they're going to think more clearly. They'll be more honest and they'll be more open to feedback, which means they'll actually grow. Now, this doesn't mean that you won't guide them. Of course, you're still going to guide them, but what you're doing here is you're helping them to think. And over time, they don't just get better answers, they become better decision makers. And that's the real goal. We want our staff thinking for themselves, because a self-managing practice is not built on perfect instructions. It's built on people who can think and act without you. Now, the third part of this is that we need to separate outcome from system. This is the deepest shift because this is where most of the emotional weight still sits. Something, for instance, doesn't go perfectly. A patient drops off, a conversation wasn't handled well, a mistake happens, and the automatic response is, that's on me. So you step back in and you correct the situation. You fix the outcome. But here's the distinction. Your job as a leader is not to fix every outcome. Your job as a leader is to strengthen the system that produces the outcome. Now, I want to say that again, all right? Your job as a leader is not to fix every outcome. Your job is to strengthen the system that produces the outcome. So let me give you an example. A CA forgets to follow up a new patient. Old model would be you jump in, you call the patient, or you tell somebody else to call the patient and have them take over the follow-ups. The outcome gets fixed, but the system hasn't changed. And so if it happens again and again and again. Now in the new model, which I want to encourage you to implement, is you stay out of the doing. You address the system. You ask yourself, okay, what broke here? Was the process clear? Was there a reminder? Where did this fall through? How do we make this easier to get right the next time round? Now, in this situation, what you're doing is you're strengthening the system. And here's the key. The outcome might not be perfect right away, but the system gets stronger and your team gets more capable. And over time, that's what removes the weight from you. So, let's bring all of this together. If you take nothing else from today's episode, please take this. The problem that you're experiencing is not a lack of time. It's not a lack of systems, and it's not that your team isn't capable. The real problem is that you're still carrying the weight of the practice. Even though that you've started to remove yourself from the work, you haven't removed yourself from the responsibility. And that's why it still feels heavy, okay? That's why you can't fully switch off. And that's why it still feels like it all depends on you. Now, the solution clearly is not for you to care less, and it's not for you to lower your standards. It's for you to change how you lead, to move from controlling outcomes to developing the people and the systems that create them. And that shows up in 3 simple ways. Remember, first, you delay the intervention. You give space for the system and your team to respond. Second, what you do is you coach instead of fix. You help your team think, not just follow instructions. And third, you focus on strengthening the system instead of stepping in to correct every outcome. Now, none of this is going to feel natural at first. In fact, it's going to feel damn uncomfortable for many of you, because there will be a period where you feel a lot less in control. But that's not a problem. Remember, that's a transition. And if you can stay in that space just a little bit longer, then it will eventually start to feel comfortable. And this is where things will start to shift. This is where the practice will become less dependent on you. And that's when leadership will start to feel a whole bunch lighter. Because the goal here is not to have a practice that runs, it's to have a practice that doesn't feel like it needs to be carried. All right, folks, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives, and I look forward to seeing you back here next week. Thanks. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.